Hi there, Paul. A long time ago in a faraway land, a young woman, Kumbirai, escaped from the clutches of an arranged marriage and eloped to be with a young man who she had fallen for and who in turn sacrificed everything, including the loss of his family, just to be with her. The arranged marriage had been planned shortly after her eldest sister had passed. Her older sister, Dembai, had been the jewel of the family, for her marriage had changed the family's fortunes. Kumbi remembered how tough things had been in the homestead when she was a young girl. They toiled all day in their little plot of land, but no matter the effort they put, the plot never produced enough to feed everyone in the family, especially as their father had two wives who had 13 children between them. It did not help, too, that Kumbi's father was lazy, and not once had he ever held an axe to help his wives to clear more land or gone to the forest to hunt with the other men, claiming, "What if I step on a snake and it bites me? Or worse, if a boar gores me with its horns and I die, what will happen to this family then?" And even when his wife suggested that he join the other men in the mines, Kumbi's father would bemoan the depths of the mining holes and count on his fingers and toes people who had broken their necks and passed away while mining. So all he did after his wives had served him breakfast in the morning was bid his family farewell before strolling casually to the Ndari, where beer flowed aplenty, and then stagger back home in the middle of the night, singing so loudly that all the neighbors and their dogs would awaken. And every new morning, the Ndari owner would come and collect a hen or a cock as payment before the new day brought the same behavioral cycle from him. And so poverty stuck to the family like a persistent knot. And because of this poverty, the family was a source of ridicule, as the two mothers would take turns going to beg for salt in one neighbor's home, grain in another's, and a little oil in yet another's. And thus neighbors had avoided them, as though they carried contaminants, although that did not stop the two mothers from begging to feed their families. Then Dembai had married. Kumbi must have been around 6 reigns when it happened, and while she was too young to have remembered the entire ceremony, 3 things had stood out for her. Firstly, her stomach had gotten so full of food for the first time ever that by nightfall she had vomited it all out. Secondly, the sound of 1,000 hooves as the bride price cows were led into the family's empty crows. And lastly, their father surviving the entire afternoon sober. Kumbi had remembered the excitement that had been in the family after the ceremony, as the mothers counted the 38 heifers and 4 bulls that had been paid, and preparations had been made. "We will breed out the heifers to multiply the crow," the 2 mothers decided, "and we will use 2 of the cows as oxen to help us clear our plot faster and plant more crops, and we'll never have to beg for our children no more. Our lives will change." But what changed even more was Baba, who was drinking way worse than before and arriving home even later, now insulting the neighbors for their poverty. Then he told the 2 mothers of the plan he had made concerning the cows one morning as he ate his leftover sadza. "You 2 will get a cow each for raising your daughter. Then the remaining cows are mine. I have seen a beautiful Moyo daughter from upstream, and I am sure I can marry her with some of the cows. Then the remaining cows, I will marry another wife after 2 years, so that this family grows even bigger." The 2 wives were left stunned, but were then even more stunned when the following morning the Ndari owner had arrived and claimed a bull from the livestock as payment for Baba's beer debt. Baba passed away a week later from a sudden illness that seized him while at the Ndari, and while the children cried inconsolably at the loss, the 2 mothers sat on the floor, receiving condolences from the neighbors, as clear-eyed as day. But from then on, the home thrived, the crows grew, the land opened up its pores for crops, and the two mothers coexisted peacefully, raising their children as one. Kumbi grew too, blossoming into adolescence and then growing fully into womanhood. And as she grew, she learned early enough that she was beautiful, and every young man wanted her. It was easy to learn this because whenever she would go to the stream with her friends to fetch water, or to the forest to fetch firewood or to gather fruits, the boys and then the young men their age would follow behind them, and eventually one of them would break out of their group to come and speak specifically to her and hardly to the other girls. And thus she knew that the pond of men she was to fish from was a large one. Yet it was one young man who caught Kumbi's eye. Taka was the son of the wealthiest merchant in the kingdom, and not only that, he was handsome too. But with that wealth and handsomeness came arrogance too. Despite all the young women in the kingdom fawning over him, not once had he approached a young woman. Instead, whenever he passed by a bevy, he would hardly look in their direction and would ignore the giggles, the slightly loud voices, the sighs and the sachets in front of him that they attempted. He has a girl from another merchanting family that he is pledged to marry, Sungano, whose family was friends to Taka's family, told the other young women. It is why he is not interested in any of the young women in this kingdom. But that had not deterred any of the young women Sungano told, as they said to her, as long as he has not married, then he is open for the taking, and thus they tripled their efforts to get his attention which he did not bother to give. So it was by surprise one night during a Janaguru festival that Kumbi had excused herself from the dancers to go and relieve herself when she found him standing underneath a tree and whistling softly. For a second she had been startled, especially as now close up as she was to him, she could see his handsome face illuminated by the glow of the moon, which made his face almost ethereal. He had stopped whistling too, and he was now watching her under wooded eyes, a slight smile crinkling the corners of his lips. "Hi, Kumbi," he said, startling Kumbi even further because she had never heard the deep baritone of his voice, and also because she did not know he knew her name. So she smiled back and said, "Hello, Taka," before resuming her walk. But he called her, "Stop," and for a moment Kumbi debated with herself whether she should stop or continue with her journey. Then sighing, she stopped, knowing that this was probably the only time he would talk to her as far from the madding crowd as possible. When she stopped, he moved closer and said, "You know, I have been meaning to talk to you alone for the longest time, but it seems you always have company with you. I am glad you are alone tonight." Even though Kumbi's heart was beating with a vigor it had never beat with ever, she managed to feign nonchalance and said, "Why do you want to talk to me? What is it about that you want to talk that requires my isolation from other people?" He did not respond immediately, but instead looked at her for a long while, a smile on his lips. Then softly, in tune with the breeze, he said, "Because I like you, and I would like to learn more about you, so that perhaps one day, if the Maker permits, we might start our own home. That is, if you permit too." Kumbi had not expected it. He had always been aloof, almost untouchable, and not once had she expected him to see her, not with the beauties that roamed around the kingdom. A part of her wanted to yell, "Yes, yes, talk to me now," but decorum held her back, and she said, moving a step away from him, "I will think about it." He smiled, then said, "But don't take all the time in the world. I will be waiting for a response from you by the end of the week." All week long, thoughts of that chance encounter with Taka swam through her mind, occupied all her actions, and took away all her concentration. Why her? Out of all the girls in the kingdom, why her? But she wasn't too nonplussed about being chosen. Of all the young men that had asked her out, Taka was probably the best of them, and whenever she got a moment, she would praise Mecca for remembering her. And Taka did not waste time too. A week after their chance meeting, he sent a cousin from his home. The young boy, all discreetness and self-importance at having been given such an important task, came one mid-morning and asked the mothers to see Kumbi, saying he had been sent by her best friend Mucha, and it was time for them to go and fetch for grass to make their brooms. Of course, Kumbi had been confused because she did not know the young boy, but he had winked at her surreptitiously, and she had followed, only to find Taka standing by the outskirts of the kingdom on a riverbank and looking at the water as it thundered past. From her viewpoint, she saw his hands shoved deep into his pockets, and he looked to be deep in thought. But then the young boy had shouted, "Uncle, I brought her with me. Look. And please don't forget to bring the gift you promised me if I brought her." And then he had disappeared into the thick foliage of trees he and Kumbi had emerged from. Kumbi now nervously turned to look at Taka and was surprised to see the huge smile on his face. He looked genuinely happy to see her. "Hi," he said, but she was too stunned, too in awe of him, that she did not know what to say to him. But he had drawn closer and outstretched his hand in greeting, and she was forced to shake it, because that was the polite thing to do. Yet her body had not anticipated the zing of fire that would succeed his touch, and she immediately wrenched her hand away as if she had been scalded. But he spoke again. "Come, let's sit by the river. I want to learn more about you. I want to see if the physical profile I have of you matches how you will present yourself." And not touching her, but just through aiming his hands towards a boulder, he steered her to the rock that they would sit on every afternoon for the next 2 moons, sharing with each other bits and pieces of themselves. In all the meetings, Kumbi had been nervous and had found it hard to look into his eyes as he spoke. Most times, she only spoke when he asked her something, and yet hardly ever asked him anything herself. Instead, she spent the time around him, pulling tufts and blades of grass from around the rock, then shredding the blades to pieces before looking for another victim. She would pick the smooth river pebbles and stare at their perfect shapes. As she listened to him speak before, she would throw the pebbles into the river and watch them land. And all this she did to avoid looking at him as he spoke, because she feared she would be seen as being too forward. But despite seeming preoccupied, she heard all he said. She heard him tell her that he was falling for her, and that one day soon he would be coming to her home for introductions. She heard him say that he was ready for a lifetime with her. She heard him say that she was the only woman for him, and there would be no one else, ever. And she believed him. And the last afternoon they had met by the river, he had said to her, "I have poured my whole heart to you, and I have told you how I feel, yet you have struggled to commit yourself to me. Should I conclude that these liaisons are one-sided, and that you are not interested in me somehow?" Kumbi had not said anything except shake her head. Takai had lifted her chin so they were looking into each other's eyes, then taken her hands in his and said, "Do you want to be with me, Kumbi, much in the same way I want to be with you?" When she nodded, she had expected Taka to shout in triumph, but he had done no such thing, except put a finger to her chin and have her look at him again. She knew that what he wanted was a verbal confirmation, so she swallowed her nervousness and said quietly, shyly, "Yes, I want to be with you." And only then had he given a shout of triumph and said, "Now that you have confirmed it, we should start making our relationship official and stop meeting in the bushes, right?" Kumbi had laughed nervously, giddily, and said, "Right." But neither of them had no knowing that this would be their last meeting by the river as young man and young woman. Their marriage would come sooner than expected. The wheels of their marriage had been rolled into motion earlier that morning, when Dembai had taken her last breath and passed, even though none of them knew it yet. But that afternoon, as Kumbi arrived home, still cocooned in the cloudy and warm feelings of the day, she had been startled to find her home filled by weeping and wailing women, while men from the neighborhood sat on stools and held their heads in their palms. Fearful, Kumbi had rushed into the yard, searching for her mother, hoping that nothing had happened to her, and was relieved to find her two mothers sitting on the ground in their living room and surrounded by other women of the neighborhood. But it was her real mother who was crying the loudest. "Oh, Dembai, my child, how could you just leave me like that with no warning? Why would you condemn your own mother by having her bury you? Huh? Shouldn't you have buried me instead?" With realization dawning in Kumbi's mind, a wave of pain gripped her heart, erasing the beautiful resolutions of the afternoon. And wailing, she fell into her mother's lap, crying, "Sissy Dembai, why? How could you do this to us?" But her mother had stopped crying and was shaking for Kumbi to rise. And feeling the insistence in her mother's shakes, Kumbi raised her head to look at the stern censure in her mother's face. "Where were you?" the older woman asked. "We have searched for you since mid-morning, and even your friends have said they have not seen you in a while. Where have you been, Kumbi? Are you gallivanting with boys now?" I was just by the river, Amai," Kumbi lied, stuttering. "I was by the potter's hut. I am learning pottery now so I can add to my—" But before she had finished speaking, a shadow had fallen over them, and they both looked up. It was Tapiwa, Kumbi's older brother, and he now came to crouch between his two mothers. "I have arranged 5 carts," he told them. "They will come and collect us all at dawn, and we can go and bury her with dignity." Kumbi later learned that since her sister was married, she would have to be buried amongst her husband's people, as she now belonged to that family and not theirs anymore. She had been severed from the family the moment she had married. So the following morning, the entire family set off and arrived at Dembai's home to even more wailing and pain. Kumbi, who had not interacted with Dembai as an adult, however, felt as though it was a stranger's funeral and spent the entire time trying as much as she could to look more sorrowful than she felt. The day after Dembai's burial, however, the family gathered again for the Kugovanaka ceremony, where the deceased belongings would be distributed amongst the family members until nothing was left, and it would be as though she had never existed. When every last piece of clothing and every last utensil in the kitchen up to the smallest spoon had been distributed, Dembai's husband requested to speak to the family, and he was given space. "My family," he said, "thank you for coming to grieve with us during our collective loss. The hand that we have been dealt with by Dembai's passing is so heavy that I know we will all struggle to heal. But that said, I would like to acknowledge our customs for giving us an opportunity to heal from situations like this through allowing for remarriage into the family. As you might remember, I supported your family with an exorbitant bride price for Dembai, but now that she is gone, that gap will need to be filled. I understand it will not be done immediately, as the family might have to discuss with the elders as to who will replace Dembai, but I shall expect a response soon, so preparations for bringing the new wife will begin. Thank you for your understanding." But even as he sat down, Kumbi could already feel the heat of eyes on her back. She knew she was the most likely candidate for this marriage, seeing as though she had undergone all the initiations of wifehood and was yet to be betrothed. The 3 other unmarried girls in the family were younger, and there was no way they would be chosen in her stead. She shivered, knowing that any other time she would have accepted the call of duty and gone on to marry Dembai's husband without any complaint, especially since she understood how financially important he was to the family. But now, after she had met Taka, after she had fallen in love with him, and after Taka had promised her forever, and she herself was excited for a future with him, now Dembai had to pass, and she, Kumbi, would be an inheritance wife? From somewhere in the depths of your conscience, she heard your mother speaking and saying, "You do not have to worry, Mukwasha. We already have daughters in our home. But for now, allow us to return home and discuss the matter amongst ourselves before we can respond to you with certainty as to which wife we will give you. Our response will be communicated to you soon." And once they got home, all the young women in the family were called, and the offer officially presented to them. Despite the immediate sister volunteering to marry and replace Dembai, the decision that Kumbi would be the replacement wife was unanimous. "You are already ready to be a wife," her mothers told her, "so you should not be too disappointed because you have already skipped the part of suffering heartbreaks from many a young man and the pressure to marry late should you get any older without a husband. And two, how lucky are you that you will marry a wealthy man who has servants and livestock, and you shall never have to work too hard in your marriage." "But I don't love him, Amai," Kumbi said. "I don't find myself attracted to the old man." "Love?" Her mother laughed. "You think I and your other mother here married that fool of your father for love? No, for me, I was getting older and he was the only one available. For your other mother, she had nowhere else to go after her parents and siblings all succumbed to the plague and the land was taken from her because she's a woman, and I invited her here to seduce him so he would marry her and give her a home. We didn't do it for something as fatalistic as love. We had to survive." "What if I don't want to marry him, Amai?" Kumbi asked. "Will I be forced?" Her mother sighed and said, "Oh, Manangu, I see you have grown in body but not in mind. And how spoiled of you to think that you have a choice in all this. Kumbi, you have no choice. If I were you, I would be taking the time to visit Mbuya Nyoka to refresh and learn some of the concepts taught at initiation. Otherwise, you have no choice, my love." But later that evening, as Kumbi lay on her bed in the girl's heart, she thought long and hard of the journey before her. There was no way she was going to become a wife to a man who was old and who did not love her. She had a choice, Taka, but how was she to convince her mothers when Taka himself had not made his intentions clear? She knew that her mothers would laugh and tell her how many young men they had courted before they eventually settled with her father. So no, telling them would only incense them, as they definitely would think that she had been seeing a young man behind their backs. So this would be goodbye to Taka, the only man she had ever loved, a goodbye to a relationship that had not lasted more than 2 moons, a goodbye to the idyllic future she had already painted for herself and her lover. Tears began to fall out of the corners of her eyes and into her head and into her pillow, and yet she knew there was nothing to do about it. Except she bolted her head as the idea crept into her mind, first as a warning, then gaining more and more strength as the only solution to this mess. She would elope to Takas in the middle of the night, like a bride, and then become his wife just like that. She would not be the first to do that. One of her oldest sisters, Ruva, had fallen pregnant before marriage, and scared that their mothers would find out, she had talked to Tete, their father's sister, and in the middle of the night, eloped. Kumbi continued to mew over it, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this was perhaps the only feasible solution out of this mess. So the following morning, she woke up rejuvenated and ready to put her plan into motion. The only hurdle she would have was to convince her Tete to go with her, for she was not sure whether Tete would tell her mothers or not. "Are you pregnant?" the older woman asked Kumbi that afternoon as they sat in Tete's homestead. "Because if you are not, then I will not go ahead on this plan with you." Of course, Kumbi had no other response than to nod, and Tete nodded too, looking at the flat belly. You can't be too far into the pregnancy now, are you? Because if you are not, you can always pass the child up as Demba's husband's child. Because, look, see, you are the only one that can serve the family, so it continues to benefit from his hospitality. How many moons have you missed? 3 moons, Kumbi lied with a straight face. I see, Tete said. That's probably too late now. Oh, the trouble those girl children make us go through. Couldn't you have kept your dignity intact by closing your legs, huh? When Kumbi did not say anything and instead continued to feign shame, she sighed. It is fine. I will accompany you. We leave tonight. The earlier this is done, the better. Back home, Kumbi pretended as though everything was fine, participating in household chores like the young, respectful woman she was. Yet her eye was watchful. When all the other girls in the compound had gone to fetch water at twilight, she had feigned some cramps and excused herself to go and sleep. But once she was in the bedroom, she had quickly stuffed her clothes in a rucksack and placed it behind the door, waiting for the opportune moment in the night when she would, under the cover of darkness, sleep out and go to Tete's before they could begin the journey to Takas. She had done all her evening chores, cooking for everyone, stacking dishes to be washed in the morning, and kneading the corn flour for tomorrow's breakfast, when again she complained that her cramps were getting stronger, before bidding a good night to everyone who sat by the fire, exchanging kingdom gossip. When she got to their heart, she sighed as she took it all in one last time. This was not how she would have wanted to live, but she had no choice. She couldn't marry Demba's husband, especially as there was someone she had fallen for, so the choice she had made felt good for her. At least, she whispered to herself as she picked her rucksack and swung it over her shoulder. At least there is someone who loves me out there. Then thinking of Taka, she smiled, then peeped outside, and seeing no one, sidled by the walls and once out of the homestead, ran to Tete's. A small fire flickered in the Moyo homestead when Tete and Kumbi arrived, and by it sat a lone figure who seemed to be staring into the flames. The homestead seemed to have retired to sleep, which was not surprising, as it had been dark for long. A hesitancy gripped Kumbi's heart as they walked closer to the lone figure, and a part of her wanted to grip Tete's hand to tell her to stop. But Tete must have sensed her hesitation, for she gripped the younger woman's arm and dragged her along. As they got closer to the lone man by the fire, Tete cleared her throat, startling the man who almost fell into the fire. Good evening, Tete said, her voice very loud. Is this the Moyo homestead? The man looked at the two of them in the shadows of the fire and said, Yes, it is. But who are you at this time of the night? Are you visiting family? Would you like some place to sleep for the night? No, Tete said, voice still loud. We don't want a place for the night. We want a place that will allow us to strengthen relations with our new family members. For we have brought with us the results of your son Taka's misdeeds that my niece here carries in her womb. The man's eyes grew wider as he looked from one woman to the next, also stealing glances at Kumbi's flat stomach. Then he spoke. My nephew, Taka, was raised very well and was taught to be respectful towards women, as our clan name and totem call upon us to be empaths. If your niece therefore carries herself, then it cannot possibly be Taka's, because my nephew would never do that. Tete cackled so loudly that Kumbi wanted to disappear into the ground forever. And with Tete's cackle, Kumbi could see lamps beginning to light up in the hearts clustering the home. Your nephew would never do that? Tete shouted. Then what do you think this is? An excursion into an unknown home at night for fun, just so the mosquitoes will feast on us? No, my dearest uncle, your nephew did this, she said, jabbing at Kumbi's stomach. Now, if you will, please call him so that he will accept the wife that he did not bother to pay bride price for first, and so we do not waste any more time. By the time Tete finished speaking, a host of people were standing on their doorsteps, holding lamps above their heads and watching the proceedings before them. But an older man approached, and Kumbi was startled to see the older version of Taka, most likely his father. And then he spoke. And Kumbi almost gasped as his voice was exactly that of Taka's. Yet his words held no warmth, no tenderness, and Kumbi shivered as he spoke to the uncle who sat by the fire. And who are these people, Chamu, that dared to cause a ruckus in my homestead in the middle of the night? The uncle's nonchalance was now gone, and Kumbi could now hear the reverence in his voice as he said, "They are here for your son Taka. The old woman claims that the younger woman is carrying Taka's child, a Moyo A." Kumbi heard the gasps that went around the yard from the people standing by the doorsteps, and she hung her head in shame. But then the patriarch had moved closer to them and was dangling his lamp right into their faces and studying them. He looked into Kumbi's face then Tete's, then Kumbi's face again before returning to Tete's. Then the man ripped out in laughter and said, "Oh, what a pity. My son has access to the most beautiful women in the kingdom and beyond, and then he chose you? You?" He finished laughing, pointing his finger at Kumbi. What a convenient little liar who probably gallivanted with another young poor man like her, and now that she has fallen into misfortune, she decides to pass out the misdeeds of her actions to my son. No, he finished, his voice serious. Go back to where you came from. "Oh," Tete said, "I see you do not tire of finding fault in this home. First, you deflower my brother's daughter. Now you call us liars, huh? How many cows might you have because my family shall fine you through your nose for all these transgressions?" The older man opened his mouth to retort, but Tete quickly cut him off and said, "You have no right anyway to tell us to go away because it is not with you that my niece had a dalliance with. Call forth your son Taka and let him answer for himself whether he knows this young woman or not." The man laughed too and said, "Well, I regret to inform you that the so-called culprit is not here in this homestead, and he is not in the kingdom either. He has journeyed south to his uncle's home, and there his uncle will introduce him to the family of the young woman he is to marry. You are late, Tete and your niece. The young woman has to marry another. Now, if you will excuse yourselves and return home immediately, my family and I want to rest." As the older man had spoken, Kumbi had unthinkingly reached out for Tete's arm as her heart splintered into a million pieces, and the pain was so unbearable for her she had to find something to lean on. While then, Tete said, not giving up the fight at all, "Marrying another will not exonerate him from this transgression he has committed, and you shall still have to be liable for our daughter. Now, as the culture of Kutizira dictates, your new bride is here, and she is here to stay because of what your son has done to her. Should your son marry another one wherever he is, then that one will be the second wife, as our daughter Kumbi here is the first one and the first to carry." She then turned to Kumbi and said, "My niece, this is your new home, and the only person who has the right to chase you away is your husband, and not any of them. I will leave you now, and may you be blessed in your marriage. Should any of the people here trouble you, then you are welcome to come to me, and I will solve them, okay?" Kumbi nodded. Tete spoke again, now turning back to the head of the Moyo household. "Thank you for your hospitality," she said, her voice dipped in sarcasm. "I will now take my leave and leave our child with you. I expect that once your son returns, he will send us a message and let us know when he will bring the Trakirai Kuno and the damages as part of his bride price. Goodbye." But the Moyo leader was quick and said, You shall leave no filth of yours here. As you go back, go together with your loose child, who you failed to instill morals in. There is no space for her here, especially as we have already told you that Taka is not here. Tete spoke back, telling him that Kumbi was not going anywhere, and yes, she might have exhibited loose morals by sleeping with a man who had not married her, but Taka himself was not pure, as he had been a willing participant in the sexual acts. To which the older man responded that it was not Taka's duty to preserve a young woman's chastity, and the onus was on Kumbi to take care of herself, otherwise how would anybody know how many young men she had been with? To which Tete responded that there was no telling also as to how many women Taka had been with. The bickering between the two went on for a long time, Tete, obviously an expert in these issues, refusing to cow before the mighty man. Kumbi had watched as the waning moon rose and gradually ascended, with no sign of resolution from either of the two fighters. A part of her felt sore watching this, hearing the words peddled by the patriarch as he questioned her dignity, while the thoughts of Taka's absence pogged her in her heart. Yet a part of her also knew that this was to be her home, for she feared winding up married to an older man that she despised. All she was praying for was that when Taka eventually returned, he would not chase her away, but would welcome her and pledge to fulfill all the promises he had made to her. Sometime in the middle of the night, however, the patriarch slumped into a stool by the fire and uttered the last words of the night. No matter what you say, Tete, this is my home, and I get to say who stays in it and who leaves. Your brother's child is not welcome here, and it will do you good if you go back home with her. Should you choose to stay, however, then there will be no room for her here, as you can see all the hearts in my homestead are occupied. Tete did not say anything, but grabbed Kumbi's arm, and the two of them went to sit on the ground by the fire. They sat in silence for a long time, and Kumbi also noticed the people from the family who had been watching the proceedings from their doors were still standing there and whispering. Any other time, she would have been ashamed, but this was not the time. So thankful for Tete, who refused to back down from a fight, she braved the chilly night wind and the persistent mosquitoes gnawing at her flesh and waited for Tete's next move. The half moon had now risen to almost the center of the sky when the patriarch sighed and stood, then called out to his family members who were now sitting on their doorsteps. Let no one give these two shelter for the night. Let the mosquitoes feast on them until they decide to return to their home. Let's go, uncle. And the two men who had been sitting by the fire stood and left. What are we going to do, Tete? Kumbi asked her once the two of them were alone. Tete smiled at her and said, You see the trouble you get us into when you don't listen to your elders, eh? Now, I don't want you to worry too much, my child. As long as I am here, I will take care of you. They sat by the fire as the moon continued its ascent, and the whole family eventually settled in their warm huts and switched off their lamps. Between the mosquito bites, the increasing chill of the night, and the eerie sounds of the night buzzing around them, Kumbi tried hard not to sink into despondency. She had envisioned a totally different outcome for herself, one in which she would have been at least welcomed into open arms by her lover, one in which Taka would have told her that they would make a plan and everything would get better with time. Yet the harshness of his father and the explanation of his absence was a bitter root for her to swallow. The only thought that was in her mind now was, what would happen from here? They must have sat outside for an hour when they heard a door creak somewhere in the homestead. Both Tete and Kumbi whirled around, trying to find the source of the sound, scared it would be the patriarch coming to tell them off with a whip. But it was not. It was a middle-aged woman who approached them, tiptoeing, holding a pair of blankets in her hand. No woman should be made to sleep outside in the cold ever, the woman whispered as she handed each of the two visitors a blanket. Us women go through a lot to provide comfort to the rest of the world, and therefore we should at least offer each other comfort in times of need. Now, come with me, let me show you a place to sleep. The woman led Kumbi and Tete to a hut at the outskirts of the homestead. This is the family tool shed, the woman said. Find spots you can rest in for the night, but make sure you are up early tomorrow morning and are sitting by the fire where they left you. Otherwise, I will get into trouble. Tete and Kumbi had already settled down when the woman came back with 2 plates of munya. Sorry, I couldn't heat it up because I feared being caught, but eat up so you gain some strength for tomorrow. It took a long while for Kumbi to finally summon the sleep gods, but it seemed she had not slept a wink when Tete woke her up again. They took their bags to the fire in the still dark night, and Tete told her, "It's almost dawn. We have to start cleaning the yard as proper daughters-in-law should do." So Tete went back to the tool hut and brought with her 2 brooms with the instruction, "You start from the other end, I start from the other end of the courtyard, then we meet here in the middle." And as she walked away, Kumbi heard her muttering, "All the things girl children have us do." By the time the Moyo family roused, the yard was clean, and Tete and Kumbi were filling the drum of water beside the well. They did not stop when the patriarch approached and said, "I see you are taking liberties in my yard." "How can we not, when we are now family?" Tete asked as she hurled a bucketful of water into the drum. "We are not family," the man said. "We do not know you. You just turned up at our homestead. Now you claim you have a relation to us?" He sighed, then said, "Okay, I see you have carried out some duties in this homestead. We can pay you for your labor and some more for your diligence. But for now, you must return to where you come from." Tete laughed, hurling another bucketful of water. "We appreciate the payment, but we cannot accept it. Instead, I advise you to keep it for your daughter-in-law's bride price, as you shall have to pay penance for deflowering her before marriage. Now, Tete, set your bucket down. I have seen the place where our daughter is. I would now appreciate it if you would dish for me a warm plate of food so I can be on my way. As for your new daughter here, I now leave her in your hands, and that is because I cannot take her back home after she has spent the night in another man's yard. She is your daughter now, and your son's wife. We shall see you when you come to pay for your ro'ora officially." And later that morning, Tete hugged Kumbi and bade farewell to the family. And alone, with neither Tete nor Taka in this home, Kumbi felt like a stranger. She knew she could never go back home, as by now the word of her elopement would have traveled across the kingdom, and by then everyone would see her as a spoiled woman, not good for marriage for anyone else anymore. Meanwhile, Taka was 6 kingdoms away from home on merchant business when a messenger caught up with them upon the waters and told him, "Your father has said you should return home soon. There is an emergency and you committed a crime that you should hurry home to solve." He had left his words with the servants and turned back with the messenger, wondering what crime he had committed that had heard him summoned in the middle of a profitable journey. So he asked the messenger what happened. "Is the lady you impregnated?" the messenger said. "She eloped for you." "I did not impregnate someone," Taka said. "There must be a mistake somewhere." "Well, she has been in your homestead for days now, and that means that the community sees her as already married to the Moyo clan," the messenger said. "It will be difficult for you to chase her away, sir." But Taka was determined to chase her away, for he knew outright that he had not done anything to any young woman to provoke her into his home, and through each hurried step his anger was growing, that by the time he reached home he was ready to burst into it. Kumbi saw Taka as he entered the courtyard of his parents' home, and for the first time in 2 weeks, her heart produced a positive emotion as joy surfaced it. A part of her wanted to rush into his arms and to hold him close to her, but she restrained herself, knowing that everyone within the courtyard was watching her, much like they had done since the morning after Tete had left her here. The family had not been welcoming to her, and this had been made worse by Taka's father, who spent the fortnight in a bad mood, cursing his son for his poor choice of a woman. He chooses a daughter of a well-known vagrant to marry. Does he not know the vagrancy will be inherited by his sons and daughters? The older man would talk loudly to himself as he walked around the yard. But she has to go back, silly girl, and snaring my son by opening her legs, looking to grab his wealth just like her sister did. Dubious. No, Taka will not marry a loose woman. The best you will do is pay damages for her and the unborn child, and she goes back to her home. And with these loud monologues, the man had declared that Kumbi should not be treated like a daughter or a daughter-in-law, as she was an impostor in the homestead. Kumbi felt the man's heavy hand through and through as she was officially given room in the kitchen, sleeping amongst pots and pans, with only the stolen, forbidden warmth of the woman she had later learnt was the patriarch's second wife, who had never had children of her own, but yet showed love to those around her. She was the only one who greeted back when Kumbi said good morning. She was the only one who accepted the warm bath water that Kumbi brought everyone in the mornings in pails, while the others left the water to cool before warming their own waters. She had been the only one to accept the plate of food offered to her by Kumbi, while the others had piled their plates in the dog's bowels after the patriarch had said, "She wants to poison us all until there's only her and Taka left in this compound, and then she will give him a love potion." And on top of the cruelties she was experiencing, Kumbi too was wrecked by guilt because of what she had done at home. Her younger sister, who had cornered her one afternoon as she fetched for firewood, had told her of the carnage at home. "Our mothers were devastated after you left because you were the only hope for the marriage to Lembai's widower. And now you are gone, and they say both Chido and I are too young to marry an old man, as we are both no older than 18 reigns. So they say they will have to negotiate with the widower to see if you are allowed to marry Sister Itai. But you know how it is with Sister Itai." Of course, Kumbi knew that marrying off Itai was a choice of the last resort. Having been born with albinism, she had faced so much ostracism in the society that she had, at the tender age of 8, retreated into the homestead and into her heart, refusing to play with others ever. How would she navigate any marriage? If she even got married to Dembai's widower after he accepted her, that is. So Kumbi's 2 week stay in the homestead had been wrecked by the pain from non-acceptance and the guilt of what she had done at home, and nothing had eased these competing thoughts. And so by the time she had seen Taka, she was so happy to finally see a friendly face. But even before she could make her presence known to Taka, Taka's father had marched out of his majestic heart and was standing before him shouting, "What makes you disregard my word that you would marry Chari's daughter and thus decide to impregnate another? Huh? Baba, I don't know what you're talking about," Taka said, his face open and honest. "I have never—" Then he stopped in mid-sentence as his eyes met Kumbi's eyes, and shock and realization hit his face. As their eyes met, Kumbi mouthed, "I am not pregnant," hoping he would understand and would not chase her for being pregnant by another. And Taka understood. Even from afar, he could see the anguish in her eyes, and a part of him broke. He did not know what had brought her to his yard, but it certainly had been a hard decision she had come to, considering the ostracism that young women who chose Kutizira as a way of marriage faced. And he knew too how harsh his father was, and how every interaction between two people had to be a transaction, and how he probably saw saw Kumbi's presence in the homestead as a loss, considering that she would be the one to take cattle out of his crow for bride price. So Taka sighed and said no more. Then his father, in a dangerously calm voice, asked, "Do you know this young woman, Taka?" "Yes," Taka said, nodding. "Could it be true that she is carrying your child?" he asked again. "Yes, Baba," Taka said, looking into his father's face, even though a part of him feared his father's wrath. "I am the one who broke her leg," he confessed. "Oh, so you deflowered her?" the patriarch said. "You went to deflower a young woman, knowing fully well the repercussions of this, knowing fully well that I, your father, had promised you would marry Chari's daughter so that we would consolidate our businesses for the prosperity of your children, huh?" "I am sorry, Baba," Taka said. "I had no intention to dishonor and disrespect you, and I found a woman I wanted to marry, a woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, a woman I love. I love Kumbi, Baba." And as he said this, he looked over at Kumbi and could see some of the anguish lift off her face. Baba laughed humorously and said, "And so because you love this commoner, you paid no heed to my instructions, to my desires for this family, for the future of this family?" Taka bowed her head and said again, "I am sorry, Baba." To which Baba laughed again before saying, "So what am I going to do with your apologies? Can I harvest them and put them in a bag and carry them over to Chari, huh?" Taka did not respond, so the patriarch asked softly, quietly, "So what are the plans that you have for this girl?" Taka knew what was coming before he said his next words, but he said them anyway. "I intend to marry her, Baba." The patriarch coughed and said, "Ah, my ancestors, what wrong have I done you that I have fed a dog with milk and meat all its life, and now it turns to bite me?" Then he turned to Taka and said, "And in whose homestead will you do all this? Will you bring a stranger as a wife? And with whose cows will you pay the bride price?" Taka bowed and said, "With all due respect, Baba, I do have some cows in your crow, and I will use those to defy me," the older man interrupted him. "To go against my word? No, Baba, to marry the woman I love." The old man was quiet for a while, looking at his older son, a mixture of painful amusement and disappointment flickering across his face. Then, defeat slumbering his posture, the patriarch said, "I can't hold you at ransom if that is what you want, Taka. You are a man now, and it is your life. I have educated you over the ways of life, and I am confident that you will not need me to survive. But before I speak one last time, I want you to say with all the conviction in your heart that you are sure about this decision." "I am sure, Baba," Taka said, and there was not a hint of doubt in his voice. "Then I release you," the patriarch said. "I will give you the rest of the afternoon to pack your belongings, but tomorrow you and the so-called loose wife of yours must leave my homestead. Take the 2 dozen cows of yours from my crow. I don't want to see the two of you ever again." Taka heard the collective gasp that went through the courtyard, but he knew that everyone was powerless against his father. So he simply nodded and said, "Thank you, Baba. I understand, and I am sorry for inconveniencing you." And he walked away from the conversation, straight into Kumbi's arms, and the two lovers looked into each other's eyes meaningfully, and then held on tight to each other. And then he whispered into her ear, "Everything is going to be all right, okay?" She nodded. 2 months later, the new husband and wife stood in their tiny hut on their tiny plot of land and held each other's hands while looking again into each other's eyes gleefully, lovingly. "We did it," Kumbi was the first to say. "We did it, my love. Thank you for honoring my family and I by paying my bride price. I know this is not the life you're used to, but thank you for your sacrifices. I will ensure that I uphold my promise to love you all my life. Taka smiled and said, "Thank you too, Kumbi, for loving me. I promise to love you too all the days of my life." The end. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I hope you liked this one, and if you did, please let me know in the comments below or leave a thumbs up. Also, if you haven't subscribed, please do click the subscribe button and do watch all the other stories on the channel. Lots of love. Bye.